Well, it was about 14 years ago in the West Kootenay that I connected with our guest today for a hockey talk. I'm Shawn Mullin. Back then, we were a little more fresh-faced. I was a new sports broadcaster for the radio station, and he was the head coach of the KIJHL's Castlegar Rebels. Now, he's the founder and president of the Coaches site, which has seen quite a few evolvements over recent times, including holding a virtual coaches conference with a special guest, Carolina Hurricanes coach Rod Brindamore. Let's take a quick watch of that.
Is there anything that you go through, or is there sort of a body language that you go into a game or a demeanor that you want to try and emulate every game to sort of, that you think is going to help optimize your team's performance?
Well, it's a good question. Your body language, how you want to present to the team, all that. Here's what I know. If you start thinking too much about everything you're doing, what you're saying, you're not going to be yourself.
All right, that's Aaron Wilbur. He's our guest today on Hockey Talk. Aaron, thanks for taking the time and joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Shawn.
It has been a long time. I don't know the last time we've seen each other face-to-face. It might have been 14 years ago in Castlegar. So many moons ago, many lifetimes ago, it feels like.
It is. I'm trying to think. I think I used to have to call into your radio show a couple times a month, and then the odd time I'd be at a Smoke Eaters game and get called up to the booth. So, but those were fun times, though. I think being young and trying to carve out a career in hockey, and as you know, it's never stable, but that's kind of part of the adventure.
Absolutely, it is. And throughout that time, you had different positions, whether it was in the BCHL, coaching high-level midget hockey, and somehow it all led you down this path to running the Coaches site. Can you kind of give us a background and a little history on how this site became what it is today?
Sure. So I went from Castlegar, spent a year in Penticton in the BCHL, working under Fred Harbinson, who's still there and has done an amazing job with that program. And we were fortunate to win a league championship that year. And then the following year, I came to UBC as an assistant coach with the men's program. And during that time, I was brought on to Vancouver Minor Hockey as a coach mentor, and I'd have to do these monthly seminars where the coaches would come in. And I was always really transparent that I wasn't really sharing my own knowledge. I was sharing information that I had stolen from somebody way smarter and more experienced than me. And when I started diving into the resources that were available, I recognized that they were frankly stale and hadn't been updated. And I always went back to the best education that I had as a coach was, sitting around another group of coaches, sharing our ideas, asking for advice, sharing our problems. And I always thought, man, if we could recreate that sort of an environment where the best coaches had a platform to share their experience and insights, that they would be really eager to do that. And it turned out we were right. And so we started with our first conference in 2011 in Burnaby. At the time, we had, I believe, 90 coaches, primarily from the Lower Mainland and Vancouver, attend. And then we left it. And then we did it again in year two. And this time we had over 200 coaches show up. Coaches started flying in. And, it really just snowballed from having, friends in the industry and coaches that we looked up to. They started telling their friends about it and encouraging them to participate. And so from there, as you said, it's kind of grown organically to what it is today, but it's been a great experience. And, obviously we all love hockey, and we love that we get to play a role in enhancing the experience for both coaches and players.
So now as a site, you're offering premium memberships. What kinds of information do coaches have access to through the Coaches site these days?
Really, it's a cross-section. We do our best to try and cover all the bases. So both from a technical and tactical standpoint to individual player development, to leadership, to communication. It's really a cross-section. And we have a team of writers that are producing content on a weekly basis. We host various events where we're able to capture content We have a podcast where we've been fortunate to interview, many of the top coaches and leaders in our sport. We have a partnership with the NHL Coaches Association, which includes a variety of collaborations on content, one of which is called a Chalk Talk video. So it's essentially NHL coaches on a whiteboard breaking down progressions through various tactics and systems, just as if they were talking to their team in practice. So it's constantly evolving. And obviously, we've been fortunate, I think, like a lot of small businesses, where we've done it at an intersection where, technology has become more readily available. So it seems like every year we're able to leverage different tools to be a bit more dynamic in what it is we do offer.
Well, and these days in particular, it's necessary to have to do that. You can't do a physical in-person coaches conference, and fingers crossed we're going to be at a point where you can do that again. How have you found the uptake has been for virtual conferences and being able to connect in that way? One benefit, obviously, is you don't have to hop on a plane and fly somewhere and pay the costs, although I think most of us would love the opportunity to do that again, but it maybe makes it a little more accessible.
100%. So, obviously we can't wait to do our live event. Like, for anybody that's been to it, it's an absolute blast. Our last live conference in Toronto, I believe we had coaches from 14 different countries attend. And it's really just a melting pot. And, obviously a lot of learning takes place from the speakers on stage, but I would say, coaches get an equal amount of value just from the conversations and the people they meet in the audience. But as far as what we've been able to do virtually, you're right. We'll generally get, roughly 500 coaches to a live event. We did what we called a virtual hockey summit back in September, and we had over 3,000 coaches tune in from all over. So I think for the opportunity to reach that large of an audience, and in particular, what we found is that we were reaching coaches in parts of the world perhaps where coaching information isn't readily available, or the prospects of hopping on a plane and coming to Toronto, may not be realistic. So at the end of the day, our goalpost is, we talk about in our office all the time, is we want to play a role that, we just had the World Juniors. We want to, 10 years from now, we want to look at the World Juniors and see that there's, 12 teams capable of winning gold, and it's a 16-team tournament. And we want to play, say that we played a small role in growing the game and providing the resources for countries and parts of the world that, have aspirations to become a hockey nation. And we want to give them the tools to develop players so that they can achieve those goals.
As you say that, it made me wonder, to what degree are you getting uptake from international coaches? I imagine still a significant majority is coming from Canada, if not at least North America. But how much are you getting an uptick of interest in what you guys are doing from the international scene?
You know what? If you had asked me that question 3 years ago, roughly 90% of our audience would have been based in North America. Today, it's incredibly diverse. And, just recently, we signed a partnership with the German Ice Hockey Federation, which sees 300 of their coaches onboarded to the platform, including every coach in the DEL and DEL2, which would be their version of the NHL and the American League. And we've got partnerships like that that are, progressing with other federations. So it's really it's become diverse. And I think part of the reason is that, in a good way, we're not Hockey Canada and we're not Hockey USA, and we don't have those affiliations in the sense that we can only feature Canadian coaches, or we can only do things and say, this is how we do it in the USA. We come from a place where we kind of view ourselves as, the United Nations of coaching, where we're just looking for the best ideas. We don't care where the coach originates from or where they come from, what their experience is, if they're an NHL coach or if they're a career minor hockey coach who just has done an incredible job at developing players and creating a positive sporting culture. That's really my job on a day-to-day basis, is to find the best and brightest in the hockey community, and again, give them a platform to share their ideas, because listen, we all want to win. We're all competitive, but at the end of the day, I think we all recognize that our game is healthier if we pool our resources, we pool our information, and we provide everyone an opportunity to succeed.
Well, I would say these days, and correct me if I'm wrong, the evolution of coaching is happening at super speed compared to 20, 30 years ago. There's always some new advantage you're trying to find, and you could have a coach who's been doing it for 30 years, and all of a sudden there's someone who's been doing it 3 or 4 who taps into these new concepts. So coaches from around the world are, I'm sure, trying to stay as current as they can and get whatever edge they can in a world where the position, the job, from what you're doing on the ice to how you're analyzing things off the ice and the video and all the different tools you have is constantly evolving right now.
It's incredible. We've got a photo in our office, and it's of Fred Shiro with the Philadelphia Flyers. And back when the Flyers won the Cup, and I believe it was 74-75 or 75-76, he didn't have an assistant coach, and he was the first coach to bring on an assistant. And at that time, that was just, groundbreaking. And we look at it where we are today, where, teams might have 3 video coaches at the National Hockey League level. They've got a goalie coach, a skating coach, and all these specialty coaches. It's very quickly starting to resemble almost like a football staff. And when you mix in the technology,
working with Fred Harbinson, he in Penticton, a junior A program, yeah. They've got 5 guys on that staff.
Exactly. And, the reality is that there's so much information out there and so much expertise, and, and if you can organize it the right way, there's no question it makes an impact on your program and the players. But what we've recognized is that if you talk to NHL coaches, they'll tell you that the X's and O's, the tactical part of the game, there's so much video now. Like, there's no secrets in the National Hockey League. Really the art of coaching and the essence of where they're looking to improve and where they recognize they can get an edge is really how they manage people, how they manage relationships, how they manage the mindset of their players, as well as the overall culture in their program. And what I think is so positive now is that on a nightly basis, whether it's on NHL broadcasts or in post-game interviews, you hear coaches talking about, and the best coaches in the world talking about culture and about relationships with their players and about treating people the right way. And listen, the way coaching was done, and certainly what was acceptable 20 and 30 years ago, and obviously beyond that, we've evolved immensely. And I think for all the right reasons. And what's happening now is that culture shift is slowly making its way into the grassroots level. And I believe that our game is better for it. Certainly the experience that we're offering players. But in particular, like, Shawn, I don't know the last time you went and watched, say, an Atom hockey game or U10 hockey game. Like, the kids are 100 times more skilled than they were when we grew up playing. And I think that's a product of just coaching and coaches sharing information.
As the pendulum swings, though, can at times it swing a little too far, in so much as the amount of information that's available to coaches, the amount of tools that are available to coaches, the amount of things that, for skill development and practices and things of that nature that are available. Can someone who's coaching a novice or an Atom team get maybe a little ahead of themselves in terms of what they want to bring and offer to, essentially children at that point who really just need the basics and need to have fun? In your mind, at least from a coaching perspective, can you go a little too far with, breaking down video of a 9-year-old, so to speak, at that point?
100% you can. And we see cases of that. I think that's one area where we recognize that we've really shifted our focus, because we recognized early on that we were providing content that was primarily being delivered by NHL coaches or professional coaches. And it was really easy for those maybe at the grassroots level to look at that and say, well, I'm going to replicate that for, as you said, my novice program. And without really taking it in context of who it was meant to be delivered to. And so we've kind of shifted our focus and said, okay, it's really easy to tell who the best coaches are, or maybe who the most experienced coaches are, because, based on their resume. But, Barry Trotz might be like a fish out of water if you put him with a group of 8-year-olds on the ice. And so what we've done is we've really tried to work with some of our partners like the Ontario Minor Hockey Association, Minnesota Hockey, and organizations like that, and say, okay, well, who are the best coaches who are doing it right with the younger age groups? And we want to talk to them, and we want to give them a platform now so they can share their ideas, because generally those are the coaches that, as you said, have maybe taken things from the higher level but simplified it and created a program that ideally can be cut and pasted. Because one of the challenges that exists at the grassroots level is generally those coaches, they're volunteers, they have families, they have full-time jobs, and they're trying to figure things out, on the car ride to the rink. And what we found is that the feedback we get is they're like, I'm happy to just take something and implement it. Like, it doesn't have to be my idea. I don't have a couple hours to review video or plan a practice. I just want to make sure my kids have a great time, that they're getting better. And if I can facilitate that, then it's a win. So we're trying to, again, leverage technology and knowledge of people that we have access to provide that.
In a world in hockey these days where, let's face it, whether we like it or not, the sport has become a year-round sport, and it has become that at a pretty young age for players who, want to have a future in the sport. And we can rail against that all we want, but that's just the trend. That's where things are going. So from a coaching standpoint, dealing with that, knowing, the challenges of that kind of pressure for young people, how much does it fall on coaches and trainers to try and find ways in that year-round environment to make sure there's enough fun in what's going on while the work's being done?
Man, that's lots to unpack there, Shawn, and great question. I would say this. I think the people who we would deem experts, and by experts, I mean people that have degrees in kinesiology, or they're strength coaches, or coaches that have worked with really elite players, and people who look at it through the lens of science and have a history of developing high-end players. We don't need to educate them. They get it. They're the ones that get up on a soapbox all the time and say, not only do you not need to play hockey year-round, but it's a detriment to you. And I mean, I could share countless conversations that I've had with, arguably some of the best people in our sport that, their level of concern is grave. And so that's not who we need to educate. The people we need to educate are the parents, and we need to give them, I believe, a sense of confidence that if their child doesn't play spring hockey and go to an extra 4 or 5 tournaments and start hockey schools in July, that they're not going to fall behind. That in the long run, if the goal is to be an impactful player or an elite player, it's probably to their benefit to not play hockey year round. In fact, all the studies would suggest that. And we need to, I think, in a nice way, and this is where I think we run into an issue, is that a lot of coaches run programs. I mean, hockey is how they make a living. And that's the reality, is that there's lots of coaches that at the minor hockey level, are making more money than, coaches in the Western Hockey League. That's a fact. And so when they're encouraging kids to be on the ice year round, it's not necessarily because they believe it's what's best for the kid. It's what's best for them financially and for their business. And we're all entitled to earn a living. And that's a whole nother conversation. But my point is this: I think what we need to do is educate the consumers, the parents, and we need to create an environment where, at a very, very young age, we're not playing the game as a form of entertainment for the parents. We're not playing the game as, in this feeling like we're in a race or it's a competition to who can get ahead. We're playing the game because we want to provide our kids a great experience. And we recognize that, the kids that, or players that end up playing it at a really high level. There's something there called talent and DNA. And unfortunately, that's not for sale. Because if it was, I'd have a full head of hair. And, and we have to recognize that, the dream that our kids have, it's just not for sale. And, some kids you can put them on the ice all you want, but hopefully they'll love the game, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be elite talents. So again, I think it's a conversation that's ongoing in our country and with our sport, but it's certainly a complex one to try and solve.
Well, and Aaron, you mentioned parents, and I think, when you say Barry Trotz may come down and have some challenges dealing with 8-year-olds, anyone who's coaching professionally, if they haven't been around the junior or midget or whatnot level of sport in a while, may have a hard time sort of understanding the nature of dealing with parents, because that's changed too. There was a time in my mind where, the coach had the hammer and a parent wouldn't dare step in and say anything. Now, not only does a coach not quite have the same hammer they used to have, which is probably a good thing, but when you're talking about the hockey industrial complex, as a result of that, there's a lot of parents that are investing. I had a parent who had a kid play for the Broncos when I was the broadcaster here that told me between his two kids in 1 year, he'd spent $75,000 on hockey and training and equipment and things of that nature. You start putting that kind of money into 1 year of your child's development, and there's, for some, not all, I want to emphasize that, there's going to be some sense of entitlement about results you're going to get as they move on to other levels. So as part of what coaches need to do in their training, kind of prepare themselves psychologically for how to best handle parent relationships and set expectations with parents and things of that nature?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that at the grassroots level, that's probably the biggest challenge we have. And I think one of the challenges with that is that a lot of the people that may be facilitating those conversations haven't been in those shoes. And I'll tell you that if you coach at the minor hockey level, especially if it's, say, a rep team or AAA team, man, the stresses that you're going to face are equal to coaches at the junior level or even the professional level. Like, it's intense, and especially when you consider that it's community based, and I think a lot of people that do coach do it because they want to give back to their community, and they're doing it for the right reasons. And one of the things that I think that really needs to happen in our sport is we need to recognize that we can educate coaches all we want, and we can have a coach that comes to the rink with the best intentions, who wants to create a great culture, who's doing it because they want to develop hockey players and people at the same time. But if the minor hockey organization doesn't share those values, and in particular the parents aren't on board with those same values, it really doesn't matter. It's never going to work. And I think that what we have to start doing as a hockey community is we need to recognize that there's essentially a triangle here of adults that are involved with our sport. And we need to find ways to get those adults all on the same page. Because again, if we don't, you could have a team of 15 kids, and 14 of those families or 14 of those parents could be doing it for all the right reasons. And they could be united in ensuring their kids just have a great experience. But it takes one set of parents that are in it for the wrong reasons. And they can absolutely poison a season. And so I think, again, I don't have the bulletproof solution, but I do think we have to start talking about the issue and addressing those three groups if we're going to find a solution.
I remember a colleague or competitor of yours back in the KIJHL had one interesting approach to it. Simon Wheeldon, who was the head coach of Nelson at the time, told me when he had parents first sign up for their program, he would create a contract essentially and say, look, you sign this, and if you contact me, it has to be about school or personal issues going on with your kid, and you can call me at 3 a.m. if there's a problem with them psychologically or to do with their education or their billet situation or things of that nature. But you have one strike to talk to me about hockey. If you call me to talk to me about hockey, that's strike 1, strike 2, the kid's gone. And it sounds simplistic, but I wonder if there's some logic to that, to say, look, of course, if I'm, taking on responsibility of looking after your 16-year-old to a degree, then absolutely you have to have access to me to talk about that. But when it comes to the sport, you have to leave it alone. And if those boundaries are set, that maybe makes it easier so that encroachment doesn't start happening.
For sure. And man, I struggle with that, because I think setting boundaries, 100%, that's really important. I think I've seen the sort of contract approach. It's used in minor hockey now with the Respect in Sport program, which, essentially is a form of a contract that parents have to sign relative to their conduct around the team or their minor hockey association. And so that's really, really important. But my concern is that, again, if we're just going to rely on contracts, then I think we're only going to get so far. I think it really comes down to education. And that's one thing that, we really believe in. Like when we started the coaches site, for example, I could get on our website and explain to people how to turn around a pylon, and nobody's going to be that interested. It's not going to be overly engaging, but Travis Green could share that same information, and all of a sudden it's engaging because it's Travis Green. And so I think what we need to do is we really need to tap into people who have, and I'm not saying because you're in the NHL, you have more credibility. That's not it at all. But you may have, a bit of a more substantiated voice, and we need to tap into those people, and we need to allow them to be the messenger to let people know that, hey, when we see these, we see it on Instagram, if the season was going on now, every year we get these videos of, parents behaving badly in the stands, or, coaches conducting themselves in ways that we know aren't appropriate. And they probably know it too, but they get caught up in the emotion. And I think we really have to set some standards, not just within our associations, but within our sport, to say, this isn't appropriate. And we need to empower the right people to share that message, so that the people that are going to behave that way, they feel like they're on an island, and that if they don't, I guess maybe align with, looking at it from a broader scope, that they're not going to be welcome in our arenas or around our associations.
Well, I have to tell you, and one of the natures of the pandemic, when we were allowed to have more hockey, some of the coaches I was talking to were saying it was kind of refreshing that parents weren't allowed into practices and into training. And it reminded me of when my daughters were in dance. We dropped them off, and then we had to take off. They didn't want parents sitting around and watching because they were distracting. I guess there's kind of a point to be made there. If it's been better without us as parents, then we have to sort of wonder, do we belong in those environments to some degree? But that's maybe a bigger conversation.
Well, it is. And listen, I want to be really clear, like the conversation with parents and conduct, it's an ongoing one. And I think sometimes it's really easy to have this perception that that's just what hockey is, and all hockey parents are, on that extreme. And that's not the case. Listen, our game is an amazing experience for parents to connect with their children, to build bonds that are going to last well past, when their kids stop playing the game. And it's a great experience. And I fully believe that the solutions that we're looking for can involve trying to separate parents from the sport or ostracize them. In fact, I think we got to bring them in more. But to your point, we have to set really clear boundaries, and we have to have some consequences where, when parents do overstep their boundaries, because listen, any coach will tell you that they haven't had a season where they've been perfect. And I think, unfortunately, we've created an environment where as soon as a coach makes a mistake or does something that, he'd like to learn from, man, he can just go through hell walking through the lobby at the end of the game and gets just chastised for it. And so I think we have to remove that. We have to let the coaches, I don't want to say just coach, we have to let them grow and develop just like we want to let the players do. And again, we really need to educate parents on, A, the right type of conduct, but B, just give them some facts about player development and recognize that, again, it's, as you know, Shawn, if you got kids, it goes by real fast. And I cringe sometimes when I see parents who maybe aren't being present and just enjoying the ride because, man, I look at myself, look at friends, I look at kids that I've coached, and you see the parents that have just enjoyed it and soaking it up. And it's probably the thing that they look back on most fondly about, raising their kids.
Now, in speaking about coaching during the pandemic, it's provided substantial challenges. I was just on a podcast I do for the Dub Network, talking to Mitch Love a couple days ago about the head coach of the Saskatoon Blades, who had just came off coaching with the World Junior team, but also was the head coach of the Saskatoon Blades. And they look great. And he was talking about trying to stay connected with his players during this pandemic, and Zoom calls and talking about nutrition and talking about fitness. But in the end, you don't have physical access to them, so you're trying to make a difference in where they're at and how their development's going. And it's been almost a full calendar year since they've actually been able to have them on the ice. So from your perspective, has that been a focus to some degree, of finding ways to make an impact and connect with your players when you can't physically connect with them on the ice?
For sure. And I think that, again, I don't like to use the word silver lining because I don't think any of us ever want to go through what we've been through this past year ever again. But I think we've really come to appreciate that our sport at its soul, it's about human connection. And whether that's from a coach to a player and parents, teammates, and that's really, like, you can't lose that. And I think that a lot of coaches, and we've had them on our podcast talking about, they recognize the importance that, the Zoom's great, but that essence of being in a locker room, being on a team, coming together on a whether it's, what level you're at, whether it's a couple times a week or every day, that's really what it's all about. And I think that's where the passion comes from. That's what enables players to give a little bit extra. And so, trying to duplicate that is hard, but I think that, I'll tell you what, we just experienced the World Juniors, and I had a chance to talk to those coaches when they were in quarantine for 2 weeks. And I'll tell you what, if you look at the World Juniors, if you were to talk to any Canadian coach from the past, or frankly, any coach preparing for that tournament, if you were to say, hey, you're going to start training camp, you're going to have 2 days, and then we're going to take your kids and we're going to lock them in hotel rooms for 2 full weeks, and they can't connect with each other. You can't talk to them. You're not going to skate. How do you think you're going to do in the tournament? And I think every coach would have told, without the benefit of hindsight, that, hey, we don't stand a chance. I think what the Canadian team did was incredible. And, I don't know if it's a Hockey Canada thing or if it's a matter of Andre Tournier and his coaching staff, and Mitch is included in that, sharing that experience. But I think that there is so much we can take from that and learn, not just about, specifically how to handle a team if you're, in quarantine in a hotel in Red Deer, but I think just about how to connect people and the value in that and how powerful that is, and how that translates to a team or player's performance on the ice.
And do you think, like, this last year has forced us to change how we connect and access technology in a way that we feel more comfortable doing that now? Of course, you want to have distance to some degree when you break as a team. You want to have a break. You want to refresh your mind. But from a coach's standpoint, if you go from a season ending in March and don't get together as a group again until, in typical years, mid to late August. That's a long stretch where your group's not connected and you have to, build chemistry again as a team when you reconnect. Does a tool like Zoom, open the door to, not all the time, but being able to work on things together and keep that chemistry and keep that culture building throughout an off season here and there, so that when you do come back to training camp, you feel a little more connected and the process is not as long to get guys on the same page?
That's a great point, Shawn. And I think it does. And I'll give you an example. I think where it really stems from is, one of our partners at the coaches site is Ben Cooper, and Ben is coaches over in the Danish league now in Herning. And, but previously was with the Panthers and Canucks and began his coaching career with Hockey Canada as their video coach. So he was, for example, he was on Babcock's staff in 2010 when they won gold. And he has an amazing story. He said, Babcock had a rule that the video sessions couldn't last more than 5 minutes. Literally would just pull the cord for the projector out of the wall if one of the assistants went over 5 minutes. And his theory was that, after 5 minutes, the players lose their focus. So you had to be really direct and clear with your message and to the point, and let them get on with their day. Players didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time at the rink. They didn't want to spend hours in meetings. And I think that, we talked earlier about how much information is available. And I think it's really easy to fall in the trap where you try and give all that information to players in one sum. And if NHL players and the best players in the world, if their attention span doesn't last longer than 5 minutes, well, then you can imagine the attention span of a 9-year-old. And my point is this: I think what Zoom allows us to do, it's another tool where we don't have to spend hours at the rink. We don't have to do it all before or after practice, where we can, to your point, we can spread it out even past the actual season. And we can take all that information and say, you know what, this information is better delivered in the off season. And here's some ways we can do it there. And this information, instead of having a 30-minute meeting after practice, maybe one day we take a day off and we just ask the players to chime in and tune in to Zoom for 15 minutes. We can even show them video. We can have a guest speaker come on. And so I think, what smart coaches are doing is they're leveraging this and they're diversifying how they get their message across. And in a lot of cases, and I don't know how your conversation with Mitch, but what we're finding is that it's enabling coaches they're not always the messenger. They can bring in other people, whether it's their assistants or people outside their program, to share their expertise. And I think what they're finding is that when it is their turn to step up and share their message, they're getting a lot more engagement with their players because they're not the only voice.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. And resources are evolving in such a way that coaches have to evolve with those resources. But yeah, what you say about video is such a salient point, because I've seen coaches, come on the bus back from a game, spend 2-3 hours on the bus breaking down video. And I'm sure you could get caught in a trap of, I've got 15 things I could show this player tomorrow, but that's overload. And if you try to show someone 15 things, they're not going to be able to focus in enough on the change that you want to make, right? Maybe you need to show them just the penalty kill from the day before, or a couple of plays from it. If you try to show them, all the different things from their game where you wanted to make points, then the main points you wanted to make are lost.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, one of the challenges with technology, as much as it opens the door to getting access to more information, the information is seemingly limitless, and there's always more work to do. And I think that in a really healthy way, we're starting to shift away from coaches being in this mindset where if I'm not at the rink at 6 a.m. and if I leave earlier than 11 p.m., then I'm not doing my job. And I think what smart coaches are realizing now is they're really clear on the information that they want and need that's actually useful. They're really clear about what information, as much as it may tell a bit of a story, they don't ignore it necessarily, but they choose not to engage with it. And, by looking after themselves and their own workload, they tend to be better coaches to their players. And a really good example of that, we talk about the relationship part of coaching. We had Brad Shaw on our podcast recently, and Brad's an assistant coach in Columbus, works with the defensemen. And so he's really, played a big role in mentoring Seth Jones and Zach Werenski, who are, two of the best defensemen on the planet. And he's talked about how they are completely different personalities, and how, when you talk about showing those 50, one of them wants to see all that. He wants to sit down, take the time. The other one's just like, hey, I'm going to go over it myself. Tell me a few things I need to look at. And so I think there's, that's part of it as well, is, again, coaches getting to know their players, getting to know their personalities, and recognizing that not every two players are the same. And there are players, and we hear stories all the time of, the players that are rink rats. They never leave. They want more information. They're always on the ice an hour before practice starts shooting pucks. And that's the right way for some kids. There's other kids that, show up a minute before practice starts, and they get a lot out of it too. So again, I think if we take one thing away from it, I always use this expression, and maybe it's not the right one, but it's, coaching hockey or developing as a player. It's not like IKEA furniture where you pick it up and you get the instructions and you just follow it to the T. There isn't one single recipe for coaching or developing players. You have to be open to new ideas, and you have to recognize the human side and that everybody's different.
Aaron, we could probably talk about this subject for hours, but I know our window is closing. So I wanted to give you an opportunity, at least to let people know, where they can access what you guys are doing. And clearly, just from what we've talked about today, there's so many resources and so much information to share for coaches. So if there are coaches out there or aspiring coaches who are interested, where can they get access to what you guys are doing right now?
No, thanks, Shawn. Anyone can go to thecoachesite.com. There's a number of free resources available on the site. There's also a paywall. If you see something that you'd like to check out, there's a 10-day free trial that you can access. And I would also highlight, we talked about the virtual events. We just announced we're going to be hosting on March 1st to 5th. We're calling it the Global Skills Showcase, and we're taking applications to identify the top 10 skills coaches in the world. I know after the first 3 days, I think we had 83 coaches apply from literally all over. So if you're a coach, and that's something that interests you, be sure to get your application in. It closes on January 29th. But if you're a parent or a coach or a player, the coaches that are going to be showcased here, I think, have so much to offer. And, again, we talk about technology. This is an opportunity to see how, coaches develop players in Sweden. We've had a number of Czech coaches apply. And so I think it's going to show us that, how hockey is done wherever you are in the world likely isn't how it's done in other parts of the world. And it doesn't mean that one's right and one's wrong. It just means that there's good ideas we can borrow from everywhere. And again, that's really the spirit of what we do.
Well, like I said at the beginning, it's been about 14 years since we first connected doing interviews in Castlegar. So it was great to talk to you again, and great to see all the work and initiatives you guys are doing at the Coaches site. Really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate your time today, Aaron.
Thanks, Shawn. Great catching up. Cheers.
That's Aaron Wilbur, the founder and president of the Coaches site. They're doing some fantastic work in a day where coaches need more resources than ever before. An ever-evolving profession for sure. I'm Shawn Mullin for Hockey Talk on HN Live. Have a great day.